There is a type of person who never seems rattled. You have seen them. Someone says something harsh, twists a story, or tests them in front of others, and they remain steady, almost untouchable. While everyone else reacts, they carry a quiet strength, a calm that does not demand attention but commands it. It is not luck. It is not a skill learned overnight. It is a deliberate choice rooted in understanding that true power does not come from controlling the world around you, but from mastering the world within. The Stoics called this mastery over oneself the truest form of freedom, the ability to remain unshaken even when chaos surrounds you. Every reaction we give hands a map of our weaknesses to the world. Every pause, every measured breath, every moment of stillness reclaims it. There is a rare clarity in living this way, a way of moving through life that draws respect, insight, and subtle influence without a word spoken. Choosing calm over reaction is not merely strategy, it is personal sovereignty, an alignment of action with reason rather than impulse. Presence becomes a lens through which you perceive intention, patterns, and the currents of behavior around you. Walking through life in this way is not endurance alone. It is insight, discernment, and awareness exercised with quiet authority. Calmness allows you to act from reason, to observe without being swept up in the heat of the moment, and to navigate every challenge with measured judgment. This is not suppression or detachment. It is deliberate cultivation of strength that cannot be taken or diluted by circumstance. Each choice to remain steady reinforces the mind, shapes perception, and transforms vulnerability into a foundation for influence. The moment someone tries to humiliate you in front of others, the weight of their laughter can feel almost physical, pressing down on your chest, making your pulse quicken and your thoughts scramble. Every instinct urges you to respond, to justify, to reclaim the dignity they are attempting to strip away. Yet that very reaction is exactly the leverage they seek. The crowd is not listening to your words, they are watching your reaction. If your voice trembles, if your expression betrays discomfort, you hand them exactly what they hoped for. Proof of vulnerability. Stoic thought offers a different path. External events, including ridicule, hold no inherent power over the mind. The harm of the insult exists only in the judgment you attach to it, in the value you assign to their attempt to destabilize you. The mastery lies in observing the moment without surrendering to its pressure, in maintaining internal equilibrium that cannot be shaken by the noise around you. Stillness is not absence. It is deliberate awareness. Through steady presence, you reclaim authority, and in that calm, the provocateur's power dissolves. Silence becomes both shield and message. Others may perceive it as strength, but it is far more. It is agency exercised from within, a refusal to be dictated by external drama. Standing firm transforms potential weakness into quiet resilience, demonstrating that influence emerges from composure rather than confrontation. As you maintain this measured presence, you begin to notice subtle shifts in those around you. The individual who sought to provoke realizes their attempt has failed, their confidence faltering, their movements carrying traces of frustration or desperation. The reactions of others become data, revealing intentions, insecurities, and priorities without a word being spoken. It is not about domination or retaliation. It is about reclaiming the space in which you exist and conducting yourself according to principles rather than reflexive impulses. Stoicism teaches that you cannot govern the actions of others, but you can govern your own judgments, your choices, and your composure. By holding steady, you create a space that cannot be unsettled, a presence that carries weight without force. Observers who anticipated a reactive display instead encounter a calm anchor, and their perceptions shift naturally. The energy that once sought to destabilize you often redirects back upon itself, revealing patterns and inconsistencies in those around you. Influence emerges not through argument or persuasion, but through the quiet, consistent demonstration of internal stability. Composure is its own signal of authority, and over time, it establishes a standard of conduct that others recognize intuitively. Remaining unshaken in the face of ridicule develops resilience. Each time you resist the urge to react impulsively, to validate the provocateur, or to defend yourself unnecessarily, you reinforce a neural pattern favoring reasoned engagement over reflexive emotion. Your decisions become clearer, your judgment sharper, and your capacity to act from principle stronger. This internal rhythm of calm begins to influence not only immediate interactions, but broader patterns of behavior, subtly shaping how others approach, test, or respond to you. The presence of composure itself becomes a deterrent. Attempts to provoke or manipulate lose their potency because you no longer supply the reaction they rely on. Over repeated practice, this calm becomes habitual, a quiet yet formidable presence in any social environment. It signals confidence and autonomy without demanding attention or performance. In these moments, you are not simply surviving external pressure, you are transforming it into a field of perception and influence that others unconsciously navigate according to the stability you maintain. Authority, insight, and clarity all grow from this disciplined mastery of self. If the idea of cultivating that kind of inner strength resonates, consider subscribing. Subscribing is not just clicking a button. It is a personal step toward deepening understanding of yourself, toward exercising calm in the moments that matter, and toward strengthening your presence in every interaction. It is a commitment to observing without haste, to acting with reason, and to building a foundation of composure and insight that carries into every part of life. Each time you engage with this practice, each time you choose stillness over reaction, you are investing in the person you are becoming. Furthermore, the cultivation of calm in moments of public mockery intersects with social perception in meaningful ways. Observers, consciously or unconsciously, compare reactions, evaluate confidence, and assign value. When one person remains serene while another struggles to maintain composure, the narrative of competence shifts. The provocateur, initially positioned as dominant by their act, is recontextualized by their own reaction to a lack of engagement from the intended target. This shift alters perception without a word being spoken, demonstrating that influence does not rely on assertion, but on presence. The Stoics emphasized that virtue, expressed through action aligned with reason, carries an inherent authority. Composure in adversity is a practical application of this principle, manifesting as credibility, trust, and subtle leadership in social dynamics. Those who witness such steadiness cannot help but recalibrate their assumptions, and in doing so, they inadvertently grant power to the one who remains unshaken. The act of maintaining inner balance transforms what appears externally as passivity into an active, observable form of strength. The lesson is clear. Influence and respect are more often earned through controlled response than through overt defense. Even as the moment of mockery fades, the internal consequences of composure persist. The self, having navigated a potential disturbance without surrendering to immediate impulses, accrues confidence, insight, and clarity. Each episode of restraint serves as evidence of capability, both to the individual and to those around them. Over time, the repeated practice of measured response builds a psychological and philosophical foundation upon which future interactions are framed. One becomes known not for the provocations encountered, but for the stability maintained in their presence. This quiet reputation precedes engagement, shaping interactions before a word is exchanged. Others approach with an awareness of the unshakable steadiness, and their behavior adjusts accordingly, often revealing intentions, insecurities, and priorities without the need for explicit confrontation. The cycle of influence thus becomes cumulative, reinforcing the internal principle that mastery over oneself is both protective and generative. In the application of Stoic thought, every moment of calm is a deliberate act of self-sovereignty, transforming potential vulnerability into enduring authority. Ultimately, the power derived from maintaining composure in public mockery resides not in denying emotion, but in mastering it. The Stoic perspective clarifies that the mind governs the interpretation of external events, that judgment rather than circumstance dictates suffering or strength. By consistently choosing stillness, one cultivates an inner citadel resistant to the turbulence of social pressure. Each encounter, each challenge, becomes an opportunity to exercise agency, to test and reinforce the capacity for reasoned action. The provocateur's intention, aimed at disruption, is rendered inert, and the broader social context aligns subtly with the individual who has learned to anchor themselves in awareness rather than impulse. This practice, repeated and refined, does more than preserve dignity. It actively shapes perception, molds influence, and strengthens the mind's resilience. The lesson is enduring and practical. Composure is not merely a response but a strategy, an embodiment of insight, and a pathway to mastery over the self and over the subtle currents of human interaction that define much of daily life. The sudden shift of someone from quiet opposition to apparent support can feel like a relief, a softening of the tension that had been building without your conscious awareness. It is tempting to respond with openness, to let gratitude or relief guide your words and gestures, but that very impulse is the doorway through which subtle manipulation often enters. Stoic reflection encourages a pause, a deliberate measure between perception and reaction, reminding us that external appearances rarely tell the full story. Trust is not an automatic response to convenience or timing. It is the product of careful observation, of watching patterns unfold over time, and of understanding motives beyond what is immediately visible. When someone changes their behavior toward you, it is rarely a spontaneous act of loyalty. There is always a reason, a shift in circumstance, an adjustment in their own calculations that prompts the outward expression of alignment. By meeting such gestures with measured awareness rather than emotional acceptance, you preserve the clarity and autonomy that are central to influence and composure. The mind that can observe without immediately engaging gains access to the subtle currents of intention that most overlook. This form of observation is not passive. It is a disciplined practice, a way to see the landscape of human behavior without becoming enmeshed in the surface-level drama. Each encounter becomes an opportunity to refine discernment, to understand not only the people around you, but also the principles by which you choose to navigate their actions. In this space of attentive calm, you notice the small, telling behaviors that might otherwise escape awareness. The half-smile, the measured tone, the timing of agreement, all convey information about the underlying motivations that words alone may obscure. A sudden ally often reveals more in what is implied than in what is explicitly stated, and the observer who remains composed gains the advantage of perspective. There is a distinction between responding warmly and revealing vulnerability, between extending civility and offering access to your inner intentions. Stoic discipline encourages the former and cautions against the latter. By maintaining a measured presence, you allow the person to express their alignment while withholding the interior knowledge that could become leverage if revealed prematurely. This restraint is not indifference, but strategic engagement, a way to participate in the social landscape with integrity while avoiding unnecessary exposure to manipulation. Time becomes a tool, not a threat. Observing how intentions manifest over days, weeks, and months allows for a fuller understanding of reliability and character. Immediate reactions, however comforting, often obscure the subtleties that determine whether allegiance is genuine or circumstantial. By waiting, watching, and calibrating your own behavior to measured observation rather than fleeting relief, you cultivate insight that strengthens future interactions and reduces the risk of deception. The dynamics of sudden alignment illustrate a deeper principle. Clarity and composure are themselves forms of power. When you do not rush to reciprocate perceived goodwill, when you maintain an evenness of demeanor, you assert a subtle authority over the social environment. Others are compelled to reveal more of themselves as they adapt to your steadiness, often without realizing that their disclosures are shaping the perceptions you hold and the decisions you will make. This is not coercion. It is a natural consequence of presence, attentiveness, and restraint. The more conscious your choices in these moments, the more nuanced your understanding of relational patterns becomes. The act of withholding immediate acceptance or revealing measured responses becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the other person's intentions, but also your own mastery over impulse and expectation. Through this process, you refine judgment and cultivate a psychological environment in which observation and understanding guide decisions rather than emotion or habit. The calm mind can pass subtle cues, distinguish between authentic cooperation and opportunistic behavior, and anticipate the trajectories of relationships with precision. Each measured interaction adds depth to your capacity for insight, demonstrating that influence is often a function of discernment rather than force, and that real authority emerges through consistency and self-governance. Remaining observant while engaging selectively also fosters a profound internal equilibrium. The temptation to react immediately with gratitude, affirmation, or alignment is natural, yet yielding to it without reflection can create dependency on external validation. The Stoics emphasized that true resilience and autonomy arise from the recognition that external actions, whether supportive or oppositional, are neutral until judged by the mind. By observing without surrendering to impulse, you maintain internal standards, ensuring that your decisions remain aligned with reason rather than fluctuating circumstances. This internal discipline preserves your autonomy, allowing actions to be deliberate and not reactive. As you navigate relationships, the interplay between observation and action sharpens, forming a feedback loop in which insight, patience, and selective engagement reinforce one another. Over time, this practice strengthens the capacity to discern authenticity, anticipate outcomes, and navigate social complexity with composure. It is in these measured interactions that subtle influence is exercised most effectively, not through overt assertion, but through a quiet presence that others instinctively respect and respond to, often revealing their own intentions in the process. In practical terms, maintaining this form of calm requires a shift in perception from immediate emotional gratification to long-term strategic awareness. The momentary satisfaction of reciprocating apparent goodwill must be weighed against the insights gained by restraint and attentive observation. Each choice to remain measured, to speak with kindness without revealing interior knowledge, reinforces a cognitive framework that prioritizes clarity, discernment, and the preservation of agency. The mind trained in this manner becomes adept at navigating the nuances of shifting allegiances, identifying patterns of consistency or opportunism, and responding with reasoned action rather than reflexive emotion. The capacity to act with insight rather than impulsive trust shapes the social environment subtly yet decisively, allowing the individual to influence outcomes through presence rather than performance. This approach aligns with the Stoic principle that control resides within. The external circumstances, the apparent gestures of others, are not sources of strength or vulnerability until they are interpreted through the mind. By exercising patience and measured engagement, the individual develops a form of psychological leverage grounded in understanding rather than reaction, insight rather than force. The interplay between calm observation and selective engagement further cultivates credibility and reliability. When one consistently responds with measured attentiveness, others learn to anticipate a stable, principled demeanor rather than emotional volatility. The reliability of such presence becomes a reference point within the social landscape, shaping expectations, reducing uncertainty, and guiding interactions with subtle authority. This dynamic is not constructed through explicit demonstration, but emerges naturally from repeated practice, each episode reinforcing the internal framework of discipline, observation, and restraint. By refraining from immediate validation or unguarded alignment, the individual maintains access to critical information, discerns motives more clearly, and exercises influence through strategic patience. The long-term impact of these interactions is the establishment of a reputation for insight, discernment, and steady judgment, which in turn shapes the behavior and perceptions of those around them without the need for overt assertion or confrontation. Influence, in this sense, is a product of consistent internal governance, manifesting externally through calm engagement. Patience and measured response also serve to reduce vulnerability to manipulation. Sudden alignment by another often carries implicit expectations, pressures, or attempts to extract concessions. By maintaining composure and withholding premature trust, the individual protects both psychological integrity and strategic autonomy. Stoic insight emphasizes that vulnerability is not eliminated by withdrawal, but managed through conscious choice and self-discipline. Recognizing the layers of motive and circumstance that underpin sudden shifts allows one to navigate interactions without compromising principles or conceding undue influence. Each encounter becomes an exercise in discernment, testing the capacity to observe, evaluate, and act in alignment with reason. The repeated practice of measured engagement strengthens both self-confidence and situational awareness, forming a resilient framework that guides decision-making, shapes perception, and cultivates influence grounded in clarity rather than reaction. Ultimately, the practice of observing sudden allies with calm attentiveness reinforces a broader pattern of psychological and social mastery. It demonstrates that authority and influence are derived less from the overt assertion of will than from the disciplined management of self and perception. By engaging selectively, maintaining measured responses, and prioritizing observation over immediate emotional reaction, the individual cultivates a form of social insight that is subtle, durable, and effective. Each interaction becomes a building block in the architecture of presence, refining judgment, enhancing discernment, and establishing an unspoken authority recognized by others. Over time, this practice develops a mental clarity and composure that is not contingent on external validation, but arises from consistent alignment with reasoned principles. In this way, the management of sudden alignment becomes both a practical strategy and a philosophical exercise, reinforcing the Stoic ideal that true power and influence originate within, manifested externally through patience, observation, and self-governed action. The sensation of being ignored carries a weight that is more subtle than outright opposition, yet it can cut deeper than direct insult. The air feels colder, the space between you and others seems to stretch, and an unspoken dismissal vibrates beneath the surface of conversation. In those moments, the instinct is to fill the gap, to make oneself visible through louder words, exaggerated gestures, or excessive demonstration of competence. It is a reflexive attempt to assert presence where the environment appears to deny it. Yet such reactions are precisely the behaviors that perpetuate the imbalance, handing the very attention one seeks to those who observe the scramble. Stoic thought offers a counterintuitive approach. The absence of external acknowledgement does not equate to a diminishment of worth, nor does it demand immediate compensation. Validation, when pursued as an external commodity, is always fleeting and often deceptive. The only assessment that endures is the one made through reasoned judgment, the internal metric by which actions, intentions, and character are weighed. When you withdraw the frantic energy from the expectation of recognition, you are not retreating but consolidating authority. By anchoring mind and body in purpose rather than in reaction, you shape the field of influence without a word. The space that others assume they control becomes one in which your composure directs attention subtly, like a still lake, reflecting clarity amidst surrounding turbulence. By choosing presence over performance, you establish a rhythm in which your actions are informed by principle rather than impulse. This is not indifference, but a disciplined allocation of energy that prioritizes meaningful engagement over reactionary display. The human tendency to chase attention is ancient, rooted in the need for social affirmation and survival. Yet it is often counterproductive in modern interactions where scarcity of acknowledgement defines value. By consciously refraining from participating in the chase, you invert the expected dynamics. Those who sought to diminish your influence through omission are confronted with an unanticipated constancy. Composure itself becomes a form of quiet assertion, signaling that your attention and focus are not commodities to be negotiated. Observers who had anticipated a response are left to fill the silence, and in doing so, reveal more of their own priorities, insecurities, or intentions. The paradox of strategic withdrawal is that by appearing scarce, your presence gains weight. The scarcity created is not in absence, but in deliberate, reasoned allocation, a reflection of an internal standard that does not fluctuate with the whims of external acknowledgement. The mind that can withstand neglect without succumbing to frantic display gains a subtle authority, a psychological leverage born from discipline rather than performance. This approach also cultivates an acute awareness of relational dynamics. The moments of being overlooked are often charged with information that is easy to miss when consumed by immediate reaction. Observing how others behave when attention is withheld allows for a richer understanding of hierarchy, intention, and influence. People reveal patterns in the absence of overt interaction, and the practiced eye discerns nuances of motive and alignment. The act of remaining calm, centered, and intentionally reserved grants the ability to map the social environment with clarity that those who react impulsively rarely achieve. Every ignored remark, every overlooked contribution carries embedded cues, and by refusing to chase validation, you begin to see the layers beneath surface interactions. This is not an exercise in withdrawal for its own sake, but in strategic attentiveness. The Stoics emphasized mastery over self as the foundation for any interaction. When the self is governed by principle and reason, the apparent slights of others lose their ability to destabilize. The power resides in the capacity to observe fully, to interpret accurately, and to act deliberately when appropriate, rather than to be swept into reflexive motion. There is also a profound psychological dimension to this practice. When attention is withheld, the urge to perform is often overwhelming because it touches on a deep-seated desire for acknowledgement and inclusion. The mind interprets omission as a threat to status, relevance, or belonging, triggering physiological responses that manifest as agitation, anxiety, or the compulsion to prove worth. Stoic philosophy teaches that these impulses, though natural, are not commands to act. They are signals to exercise reasoned choice. By recognizing the transient nature of external evaluation, and by choosing to redirect energy toward actions aligned with purpose, you reinforce self-governance. The internal standard becomes the source of stability, making the external environment less capable of eliciting reactive behavior. Over time, the repeated practice of sustaining composure under neglect strengthens cognitive and emotional resilience. The individual becomes less reactive to omission, more capable of discerning genuine opportunity, and increasingly able to guide interactions with clarity and intention. Presence in this sense is both shield and instrument. It protects from unnecessary agitation and exerts influence through the subtle assertion of steadiness. In addition, the cultivation of calm under omission fosters a form of psychological autonomy that extends beyond immediate interactions. The repeated exercise of self-regulation in the face of social invisibility trains the mind to differentiate between transient social signals and enduring value. As Epictetus observed, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Each moment of restraint reinforces the understanding that personal worth is derived from internal alignment, not from the acknowledgement of others. This internal consistency shapes behavior across diverse contexts, reducing susceptibility to manipulation, distraction, and emotional reactivity. By embedding this principle in practice, the individual gains a form of influence that is self-reinforcing. Steady engagement, informed observation, and selective allocation of attention collectively create an aura of authority that others unconsciously respect. The Stoic lesson is evident. External conditions do not dictate inner stability. The disciplined mind determines the interpretation and response to those conditions, transforming potential frustration into strategic advantage. The act of maintaining calm in the face of being overlooked also reveals a deeper insight about social dynamics. People respond predictably to scarcity and confidence. When someone does not react to a mission with desperation, they signal an internal equilibrium that is both attractive and commanding. This is not manipulation, but a natural reflection of composure. Those who attempt to assert influence through neglect encounter a subject whose mind is aligned with principle and purpose. The result is a subtle realignment of relational dynamics, where attention and influence are drawn to steadiness rather than volatility. The psychological effect extends beyond the immediate actors, shaping the broader social environment in ways that reinforce both respect and credibility. The practice of strategic non-engagement becomes a tool for cultivating presence, authority, and insight without explicit assertion, allowing the individual to navigate complex social landscapes with confidence and discernment. Ultimately, the choice to remain composed when ignored strengthens both internal governance and external perception. The Stoic principle that control resides within is demonstrated in practice. By observing without reacting impulsively, the individual maintains clarity, preserves energy, and exerts subtle influence. The moments of omission, rather than diminishing authority, provide the opportunity to demonstrate self-possession, strategic insight, and psychological resilience. Over time, the cumulative effect of these practices establishes a pattern of interaction in which steadiness commands attention, curiosity replaces control, and internal discipline shapes external outcomes. The capacity to maintain purpose and composure in the absence of acknowledgement is both a safeguard and a mechanism for influence, reinforcing the enduring lesson that the measure of authority lies not in the reactions of others, but in the consistency and intentionality of one's own mind. Falsehoods spread quickly, faster than a single response can travel. A story told in whispers or exaggerated for effect seems to gather momentum on its own, creating ripples that you cannot immediately control. The initial impulse is to intervene, to clarify, to correct, to set the record straight in hopes of reclaiming influence. It is a natural reaction. The mind recoils at misrepresentation, at being framed in a way that undermines credibility or intention. Yet, the Stoics offer a different path, one that relies not on reactive force, but on deliberate composure. Truth, when paired with steady awareness, carries an authority independent of the noise surrounding it. Panic, defensiveness, and the need for immediate resolution only amplify the very rumor one seeks to contain. Each hurried explanation feeds the fire, lending urgency and importance to something that initially might have been fleeting or unconsidered. Calm, in contrast, acts like water on a spark, suffocating the flames without drawing attention to the act itself. In this space of measured steadiness, influence emerges not from argumentation, but from the evidence of self-control, which observers register intuitively. People constantly assess more than the content of a story. They evaluate the demeanor, the confidence, and the poise of the individual at the center. Maintaining equilibrium conveys that the narrative, regardless of its distortion, cannot destabilize the one it concerns. This composure is an unspoken declaration of inner authority, signaling that external opinion holds limited power over reasoned judgment. As the falsehood circulates, the ability to withhold reactive explanation allows you to observe the environment more clearly. Who repeats the story without verification? Who adds embellishments? Who seeks to benefit from the perception of chaos? Each interaction, each repetition, reveals the structure of influence surrounding the rumor. By remaining unshaken, you gain clarity not only about the story itself, but about the social dynamics in which it travels. There is a subtlety in allowing others to reveal themselves through their handling of information. A rushed reaction obscures these patterns, drawing attention to your response rather than to the behaviors and intentions of those around you. Composure transforms observation into understanding. By choosing to act with patience and precision rather than emotional urgency, you gather insight that strengthens both perception and future decisions. The more measured your engagement, the more authority your presence communicates, and the more others are compelled to interpret your actions through the lens of stability rather than volatility. In this way, the act of holding steady functions as both defense and influence, a quiet power that operates beneath the surface of overt conflict. A measured response to falsehood requires discipline in thought and speech. Stoicism teaches that judgment, not circumstance, defines perception and reaction. Words spoken in haste, driven by the need to prove correctness, rarely convey control or authority. In contrast, a carefully considered statement, delivered without visible agitation or urgency, communicates not only the truth, but also mastery over one's own emotional terrain. The content of the message matters less than the demeanor with which it is expressed. Others are sensitive to the interplay between assertion and composure, and even subtle cues, tone, pacing, the absence of agitation, signal a form of authority that resonates beyond the specific context of the rumor. By framing responses with deliberation, you reinforce an internal standard of reasoned action. This approach is less about control of external narratives and more about the cultivation of influence through personal equilibrium. When the mind remains anchored, external disturbance cannot dictate the quality of judgment or the clarity of expression. The story, no matter how widely circulated, is filtered through your presence, which communicates confidence, steadiness, and insight. Authority emerges from alignment between action and principle, demonstrating that composure itself can serve as the primary arbiter of credibility. Holding your ground in the face of falsehood also reshapes the perceptions of those who witness the exchange indirectly. Observers are constantly interpreting not only the events, but the reactions of those involved. A person who appears rattled amplifies the weight of the rumor, signaling to the environment that it merits attention and possibly judgment. Conversely, an individual who maintains composure communicates that external chatter does not define reality, that the core of character is not subject to transient opinion. This steadiness fosters subtle influence, guiding perception without overt intervention. Those who seek to manipulate or distort information often depend on eliciting visible disruption. By remaining anchored, you remove the mechanism by which the falsehood gains traction. Influence, in this sense, is exercised through presence rather than argument, through example rather than contestation. The demonstration of equanimity becomes a signal that commands respect, reassures allies, and recalibrates the expectations of observers. Through consistent practice, composure becomes a strategic tool that shapes perception, even when direct engagement is minimal or absent. There is also a cumulative effect in resisting the urge to respond hastily. Each moment of steady observation reinforces patterns of mental resilience and perceptual clarity. The individual learns to distinguish between immediate provocation and long-term consequence, between appearances that demand attention and those that do not. Over time, this repeated exercise builds an internal metric for assessing situations, allowing for discernment that is both swift and measured. The mind develops the ability to anticipate outcomes, gauge intentions, and select moments for intervention that maximize effect while minimizing unnecessary exposure or agitation. This disciplined approach reduces vulnerability to manipulation and enhances the capacity for strategic engagement. It cultivates an intuitive understanding of human behavior, where patterns of reaction and projection reveal themselves through consistency and repetition. Composure is not merely defensive, it is a tool for observation, insight, and influence. It allows one to operate effectively within the social landscape without surrendering autonomy to the fluctuations of rumor or opinion. Falsehoods, when met with measured calm, also serve as a test of character and presence. They create an environment where those who are reactive reveal vulnerabilities, while those who maintain composure demonstrate stability. Each interaction under such conditions becomes a subtle examination of discipline and influence. The unshakable individual communicates strength without needing to assert it verbally. This creates an impression of authority that is internally consistent and externally recognized, reinforcing both credibility and social presence. Observers, including allies and neutral parties, gain insight into the character of the composed individual, often perceiving reliability, strategic foresight, and emotional resilience. The social weight of steadiness can outweigh the superficial impact of false narratives, illustrating that influence is a function of presence rather than argument. By cultivating this approach consistently, the individual builds a durable form of respect and authority that transcends momentary circumstance. The strategy of calm response also encourages a broader perspective. Stoicism emphasizes the separation between what is within our control and what lies beyond it. Rumors, distortions, and the perceptions of others are not directly controllable. What is controllable is one's own judgment, demeanor, and choice of action. By internalizing this principle, you shift focus from reactive management of appearances to proactive cultivation of presence. Each decision, each moment of restraint, reinforces an internal standard that informs subsequent behavior. Over time, the practice develops a stable psychological framework in which composure is habitual, influence is subtle yet pervasive, and the individual navigates social dynamics with increasing clarity and effectiveness. The power of calm, in this context, derives from its consistency and its ability to shape perception indirectly, creating a field of influence that is resilient to the distortions of rumor. Ultimately, the practice of responding to falsehoods with measured composure transforms potential vulnerability into strategic advantage. It demonstrates that credibility, influence, and authority are not solely functions of argument or correction, but are grounded in the demonstration of steadiness. Observers perceive not only the facts of the situation, but the resilience and clarity of the person at its center. Each instance of calm engagement strengthens the capacity to navigate complex social interactions, enhances the ability to discern intention and motive, and reinforces the internal standard by which judgment is exercised. Through disciplined restraint, insight, and deliberate action, one cultivates a presence that commands respect, mitigates the impact of misinformation, and embodies the Stoic principle that control resides within. In the quiet authority of composure, influence and stability converge, revealing that strength lies not in the reactive correction of external circumstances, but in the deliberate governance of self and perception. Some people move through life as if searching for openings, quietly assessing, waiting for the moment to probe. Their goal is rarely kindness or connection. It is information, insight into the gaps, hesitations, and uncertainties that lie beneath the surface. A seemingly casual question, an offhand comment, even a slight shift in tone can be an instrument of testing designed to reveal what is hidden. The measure of their success, however, is not in the subtlety of their inquiry, but in the reaction it elicits. The moment you allow your emotions, your defenses, or your impatience to dominate, you reveal exactly what they sought: a vulnerability to exploit, a fracture in composure that can be observed, noted, and potentially leveraged. This is where the Stoic principle becomes vital. Mastery over self is the only reliable form of control. You cannot dictate the curiosity or intentions of another, but you can govern your own judgments, your own emotional responses, and the interpretation you place on what is presented. In doing so, you transform potential exposure into an opportunity for demonstration of inner stability. The key is in acknowledging history without attachment, observing past missteps without allowing them to dictate current behavior, and responding with measured awareness that disarms the seeker before they can exert influence. The strength of this approach lies in embracing your imperfections openly, without shame or defensive distortion. The experiences you carry, the mistakes you have endured, the challenges you have faced, these are not liabilities but components of a narrative that, when approached with equanimity, reveal resilience rather than weakness. A probing question directed toward a past failure meets no defensive wall because the wall has been replaced with acceptance. The scar, once a source of potential pain, now functions as a marker of growth, a testament to endurance, and an indicator of insight. By holding your story without flinching, by recounting or acknowledging it without emotional exaggeration or self-condemnation, you remove the power that external observers hope to gain. The seeker's instrument, designed to unearth hesitation or shame, encounters instead a calm reflection of experience, an unyielding presence that refuses to yield leverage. This is the quiet strength of Stoic practice, the capacity to own one's narrative fully, to transform perceived vulnerabilities into evidence of character, and to allow composure to communicate authority without overt assertion. The environment of probing, once potentially threatening, becomes an arena for demonstrating the alignment between internal reason and external conduct. Observing the seeker's tactics without immediate response is another dimension of strategic mastery. Every subtle shift, every calculated remark, every attempt to gauge emotional reaction becomes data, and the composed mind records it without surrendering influence. By maintaining equilibrium, you create a buffer between action and reaction, allowing for a deliberate response rather than impulsive defensiveness. This approach turns the seeker's strategy back upon itself. Their probes reveal less about you than they do about their own assumptions, anxieties, and methods. In their effort to map your weaknesses, they encounter a stable, grounded individual who does not concede control over internal judgment. The act of maintaining calm, of choosing measured engagement, forces a reconsideration in real time. Patterns in questioning, attempts at subtle manipulation, and the timing of challenges become visible without the distortion of reactive emotion. The practiced observer, anchored in Stoic discipline, recognizes these dynamics and navigates them with precision, turning the potential for vulnerability into an exercise in perception, understanding, and psychological presence. The integration of past experience into present composure reinforces both credibility and influence. Stoic insight emphasizes that history should not imprison the mind, it should inform it. The lessons embedded in prior failures, missteps, and misunderstandings are valuable precisely because they allow the individual to anticipate recurring patterns, recognize the motives behind probing, and calibrate responses with intention. When confronted with questions designed to unsettle, the awareness of one's own resilience and the acknowledgement of prior challenges create an internal frame that is unshakable. This awareness manifests externally in a calm demeanor that signals competence and security. The seeker, expecting disruption or agitation, encounters instead steadiness that communicates a deeper command over self and circumstance. The social impact of this practice is subtle yet profound. It establishes a reputation for insight, for control, and for unflappable judgment that shapes the behavior and perception of those around you. Composure becomes the primary instrument of influence, more persuasive than argument, more revealing than assertion. This practice also cultivates a sense of detachment that protects against overinvestment in the perceptions or expectations of others. The Stoic perspective teaches that external judgments are inherently limited, unreliable, and often misinformed. The seeker's intent, while designed to create exposure, does not determine value or worth. By maintaining this detachment, the mind remains focused on reasoned action, weighing evidence, context, and principle, rather than reacting to the manipulation of attention or opinion. Each probing encounter is thus an opportunity to exercise discernment, observing intent, assessing relevance, and choosing whether, how, and when to engage. The exercise strengthens psychological resilience, reinforcing the understanding that influence over oneself is both protective and generative. The probe loses its power not through confrontation, but through consistent practice of presence, reflection, and measured engagement. An essential component of this approach is the conscious selection of response. When intervention is required, it should be precise, purposeful, and unburdened by emotional urgency. The content of the engagement must serve the broader objective of maintaining authority, clarity, and autonomy. By responding deliberately, the individual communicates that they act from principle rather than impulse, from comprehension rather than compulsion. This calibration of action is both a defensive and strategic measure. It preserves internal equilibrium while subtly shaping perception in the external environment. Observers perceive competence not merely in the act of answering, but in the quality, timing, and consistency of the response. Through repeated practice, this approach develops a pattern of engagement in which composure itself becomes the primary vehicle of influence. The seeker's intended leverage dissolves into a reflection of their own strategies, their assumptions, and their reliance on the expectation of reaction. Over time, the repeated application of these principles creates a form of social and psychological mastery that extends beyond isolated interactions. By consistently embracing vulnerability without defensiveness, observing without immediate reaction, and choosing precise moments for engagement, the individual cultivates an environment in which influence is exercised through presence rather than coercion. Each probing encounter contributes to a broader pattern of clarity, credibility, and psychological resilience. The cumulative effect is a reputation of stability, insight, and composure that informs future interactions. Those who attempt to test or manipulate recognize, consciously or not, that the individual's responses are governed by principle rather than circumstance. Influence in this sense arises naturally from consistent self-governance rather than the pursuit of dominance or attention. The practice of embracing one's own story without flinching also reshapes the internal landscape of confidence. By acknowledging past errors without shame, the mind develops a sense of equanimity that sustains focus and clarity in the present. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Each moment in which composure is maintained reinforces a neural and cognitive pattern that prioritizes rational action over reactive emotion. This repetition strengthens both awareness and resilience, ensuring that future probes encounter a mind conditioned to steadiness. The scars of prior experience become tools of insight, markers of endurance, and evidence of competence. They communicate readiness, stability, and authority to both self and observer, transforming past challenges into instruments of influence and clarity. The seeker, anticipating disruption, confronts instead a controlled, measured, and unshakable presence, reducing the efficacy of their probing and enhancing the perception of reliability and strength. Ultimately, the ability to navigate probing questions with calm, measured awareness demonstrates that mastery lies within. Control over internal judgment, clarity of perception, and the choice of measured engagement shape both immediate outcomes and long-term influence. The seeker's intentions, no matter how carefully calculated, are neutralized by the deliberate application of composure, insight, and self-governance. Each encounter reinforces a pattern of psychological presence that informs reputation, strengthens resilience, and communicates authority without overt assertion. The Stoic principle is evident. Power resides in the mind's consistent discipline, and influence arises from the unshakable alignment of perception, judgment, and action. In embracing one's own story, acknowledging imperfection, and responding with measured presence, vulnerability becomes strength, exposure becomes insight, and what was intended as leverage becomes a mirror of enduring resilience. Every choice to remain calm, steady, and deliberate shapes not only the way others perceive you, but the way you experience the world. Each moment of restraint, each act of composure is a brick in the foundation of your inner strength, a strength that cannot be taken, borrowed, or diluted by circumstance. Carry it with intention, let it guide your actions, and allow it to quietly influence the spaces you move through. Your presence matters more than the noise around you, and the mastery of self is the truest power you will ever hold. Take a moment now to explore one of the suggested videos on the screen. Each one will help deepen the practice of presence, insight, and composure in your daily life.